It was time to end things with the dentist. His final quarry lay in the secure vaults of the Golden Grin, a casino with a reputation for making and breaking men. It wasn't cash or gold he was after, but something much more valuable. All the while, murky water had started to take notice, and CrimeNet may not have been as secure as Bain presumed. Also, with a trip or two on the agenda, the gang was about to clock up some serious air miles. This is the story of Payday. Sokol, the Falcon. Born in Russia, this gifted young heister was Bain's missing puzzle piece in the dentist conundrum. At 25, he was likely the most fit, athletic and resilient heister in the crew, bringing the Payday gang a new dynamic. He was also predominantly in the heisting game for the money and the thrill of it, making him an easy man to understand and to trust. As for his backstory, it must be difficult for someone as in the public eye as Sergei Kozak was, to remain an anonymous heister. But despite his bright future in the world of ice hockey under contract as a grinder for the St. Petersburg Bombers, he lived for thrills altogether different. Sokol was his alias when the brutality of the sport didn't quench his thirst for adrenaline. No matter how many brawls he instigated on the ice, it was nothing to how he felt when emptying a vault. Much like the other gang members, he was experienced in robbing banks, having operated across all corners of Russia whilst touring with his team. But uniquely, he had experience when it came to casinos. In recent years, his violent conduct on the ice and allegations of doping off it had left his career in limbo, meaning his hobby was soon to be his occupation. The increasing frequency with which Sokol was pursuing heists alone had drawn attention from the Russian police, who were closing in on him. But in the process, he'd perfected the mechanism that sealed his invitation to the Payday gang. Bain was willing to fly him out of the danger zone of St. Petersburg on the understanding he would bring the prototype that made his solo heist infamous: the Arc laser cutter. Meanwhile in DC, Dallas received the go-ahead from Bain. He and the 3 core members whom the dentist originally had his contract with were to be flown to Vegas and await contact from an expert on vault infiltration. The remaining crew were ordered to maintain the status quo in Washington. Of course, Sokol was flown straight into Vegas. Time was of the essence, and a confrontation with Jacket, who'd remained with Hoxton's group, was hardly ideal before a job of this magnitude. Apparently, Jacket had some sort of issue with Russians. The plan was initially to take the casino silently, using gas to drug the vast security team, which worked hand in hand with the casino to provide the kind of security that the Payday gang wasn't accustomed to. But as we know, the dentist hated risk, so Sokol was drafted in to supply a plan B. It's a good thing too, as despite the unarmed limousine entrance, the crew's gear was not as well hidden as it should have been, and quickly Houston was pulled out, so a team of Dallas, Chains, Wolf and Sokol could put the latter's heisting tool to use. The 4 entered guns blazing, repelling the Nevada police assault long enough to enter the casino armory to retrieve and detonate C4 on the casino floor level, and soften up their entrance to the vault. Bile was signalled to drop winch parts into the courtyard, and using pre-stashed fireworks as makeshift flares, a blimp, compromised by the dentist, was signalled to lower Sokol's new drilling mechanism through the casino skylight. This was the real deal. The Payday gang had outdone the drilling power of even the Beast, having to winch down the Goliath frame before drilling could begin. You see, whilst heisting alone, Sokol had likely used a more portable version of the Arc plasma cutter. But here, the crew weren't looking to pick a lock with the drill. They were removing an entire section of the casino floor. This meant Sokol had to adapt his design to fit within a rig which could support a wider arc for the plasma cutter and allowed it to burn downwards. The contraption was unwieldy, but as prototypes go, it certainly displayed the genius Sokol offered the gang. He christened it the BFD. I'll let you work out what that stood for. Given the short turnover period, the drill design was still not perfect. It required an exorbitant amount of power and seriously ran the risk of overheating, hence the need for water cooling tanks attached to the exterior. I suppose all of its flaws could be forgiven when taking into account the mounted turrets Sokol chose to flank it with. 7 minutes of intense firefight followed, as the wide open nature of the drilling space took its toll, and repeat trips to the bathroom to fill up the water coolers were far from ideal. Dallas swore Sokol took a bullet or two, but simply shook it off time and again, a true grinder. At last it had burned full circle, and a route into the vault was open. Dropping into it, the crew first noticed their reward, A cash vault larger than Big Bank awaited, and of course, the dentist had little interest in that sort of loot. No, the contracted item was further in, sealed away under additional security. Inside the vault within a vault was a simple box. A chest of ancient-looking origin. Adorned on its exterior was an Eye of Providence, a symbol which could be interpreted in many ways, not least as a reminder that we are all being watched over. The item was astoundingly heavy, but the two assault specialists Chins and Wolf forged a path back to the limousine, bidding farewell to the Golden Grin and Vegas. In the aftermath of the heist, the Las Vegas Police Department was recorded expressing frustration with the casino higher-ups, as they were unwilling to confirm the nature of what was stolen, with one employee report simply stating, "They ripped the heart out of this place." What the chest actually was would remain a mystery, but this wasn't the first time the dentist asked the crew to recover a relic of the past, so it's easy to assume he was someone with an influential connection that was interested in history. But why the secrecy? In time, we'd find out. But for now, the debt of Hodgson's liberation was paid in full, and the dentist vanished from CrimeNet as fast as he'd initially appeared. In response, Bain proceeded to turn all focus back to the gang's primary objective, one he'd yet to make clear to even Dallas. The first step, though, was contacting Gage again, as the DC police were beginning to up the ante, and it seemed Mayor McKendrick was no longer to be relied upon. As such, more firepower was in order, and a weapon supplier closer to home than the Butcher may resolve any supply issues for the gang now 11 members strong. Gage had just recently returned from extended leave of the US, likely forced on the run after Shadow Raid, but on his travels, he'd acquired new contacts of his own, expanding his inventory quite impressively. The Japanese weaponry he'd secured from his time in the country was state-of-the-art, although the medieval-inspired weapons he now offered were a lot less orthodox. Crazy, but the more medieval in nature, Wolf and Jacket certainly didn't complain. On his travels, Gage could only be so discreet, as the wheelchair-bound vet tended to stand out in the crowd if an individual knew who they were looking for, which is why it was no surprise that he was shadowed back from Japan to the CrimeNet web of DC by a figure clad in a cream-tailored suit and branded by Irezumi. Jiro, a man who'd come seeking Bane for answers. Jiro was a lifelong criminal, but one with an impeccable code of ethics. He joined the Osaka branch of the Yakuza at an incredibly young age, swiftly climbing the ranks and gaining his boss's trust and favour. This proximity to the inner circle led him to breaking an essential rule, as a forbidden romance with the boss's daughter Yoshimi sealed his fate within the family. Not before she gave birth to a son though, Kento. Soon after his child was born, Jiro was shot and betrayed by the men he trusted. Although left for dead, he survived the encounter, but was still unable to escape the Japanese justice system without the protection of his once family, being sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. He left that prison those 2 decades later to find his once lover dead and son nowhere to be found. Before claiming his bloody revenge on those he once considered family, his old boss who'd arranged his betrayal made one attempt at amends, telling him that Kento, his son, had been moved to America, and that a contact of the Yakuza's in the US, Bane, would help to track him down. Hence Jiro tailed Gage back to his workshop in DC, met the gang at their next weapons deal, and introduced himself and his plight to Bane. Standing before the crew, his blue eyes betrayed a half-American parentage, and although English didn't come naturally to him, he was able to explain his desires and skill set to them. Bane didn't have all the answers he needed, but found it hard not to respect the old Gokudo, offering him sanctuary within the gang while he searched for more clues regarding Kento's whereabouts, if he were to lend them his strength and experience. Jiro was no bank robber, but violence, extortion and gang warfare had been his existence 20 years prior, so he was no stranger to this life. Much like Sokol, he was quickly feared by the DC police for his immense resilience to pain and seeming ability to grow in strength in spite of it. Over the course of his brief time in the US, a country where he saw people could be bought and sold, he learnt an important lesson. Okane ga subete. Cash is everything. Jiro would fit right in. Meanwhile, as Bane had anticipated, DC moved at once against the ever-expanding CrimeNet. Mayor McKendrick had cracked under intense scrutiny of his policies and over calls to depose of him as mayor, calling on the creation of a new task force specifically designed to take down the Payday gang by cutting off the serpent's head. The elephant's hand was forced, backing McKendrick to bring in the respected and feared Commissioner Solomon Garrett to lead a new crack team investigating the movements of CrimeNet and providing him with the firepower to intercept the gang at every turn. Garrett brought with him a two-pronged attack. For a while now, there had been a growing sentiment of national Stockholm syndrome within the civilian populace, as the gang exposed the major weaknesses of their supposed protectors time and time again. The new commissioner wanted to change this rhetoric and expose the crew for the murderers he saw them as, highlighting the vicious copycat killers that CrimeNet had spawned. At the same time, Garrett moved to fully militarize the DC police force, starting from the top with a new captain of operations, the decorated military police officer Neville Winters. With him came the Phalanx teams, riot control specialists designed to protect Winters' approach and provide support to cops on site. Winters would prove to be a foe the crew never truly overcame, yet his own success is also highly debatable, often being forced to retreat from combat once his shield wall broke down. The crew's success in dealing with the new anti-Payday initiative likely came down to just how much intel Bane was able to acquire on Garrett's plans and Winters' movements. You see, Bane was always a step ahead, receiving a tip that Washington PD was being restructured to combat CrimeNet specifically from his police mole, Wesley Smith. Smith was himself able to plant a compromised bobblehead dozer figure in the commissioner's office at Bane's command, granting CrimeNet access to his FBI account. Garrett's meticulous planning and recording of Payday gang movements and past heists would prove to be a double-edged sword to FBI operations. Essentially, Bane and the crew had access to everything known about them and their heists, as well as access to his internal correspondences within the department. This meant the Payday gang were always one step ahead, and although police resistance from here on in may have been greater, the crew were never in any danger of being caught off guard by Garrett. So, who would be the first contractor to offer the crew a job after Garrett's new hires had made operating in the US a greater risk? It could only really be Vlad, couldn't it? Who else is crazy enough to challenge the man who'd put down both the Irish and Italian mobs back in Boston? In his defense, Aftershock was driven by freak necessity and took place outside of Garrett's jurisdiction, in the wake of a high-magnitude earthquake in Southern California. He'd attempted to call on the gang 2 weeks prior to escort a weapons shipment and aid in its distribution, informing Chains on his morning run that he'd done a deal with a Seattle-based weapons syndicate, supposedly the largest criminal organization in the US, to supply premium firearms with a bit of extra flair. Being honest, Vlad was never the guy to approach when it came to weaponry, and Bane had made it clear that after the fiasco with the nukes, any dealings with Vlad had to go through him. As such, Chains scoffed at the idea, leaving Vlad to plan the operation alone. In the aftermath of the quake, which devastated the highways linking the west and east coast, Vlad was left with little choice but to show his hand completely to Bane, signing off on a deal to send 4 crew members to recover his stranded munitions. The weapon safes were being transported by Vlad's shell company, Kowalski and Hutch, which suspiciously had its offices burned down and all records destroyed after the event. The crew were to provide support to his hired hands already on the scene, who'd attracted police attention in the disaster zone. The crew were airlifted in to soar into their vehicles and load their contents into another functioning truck, which could then be airlifted by chopper from an extraction location away from the crumbling overpass. All objectives were completed, and the shipment was recovered and transported to DC, where Vlad could finally do business, offering the gang first choice on a weapon each as part of their reward. Unfortunately for Vlad, these custom weapons would never catch on, with purists in the heisting underworld refusing to touch his bootleg products, some of which were badly damaged in transit. In the end, he was left with such a massive supply he had to start giving weapons away for free, hoping to forget about the entire sordid affair. Post-Aftershock, CrimeNet seemed untouchable again. Not for the first time, they'd operated outside of DC with total impunity. Even with Garrett and Winters on their case, the cops were consistently a step behind and were currently failing to recover the integrity of the clown case. Even Vlad's wildly unplanned heists were proving little trouble for the now 12-man strong gang. But that illusion of security was about to be shattered by an ever-present adversary. Murky Water finally saw it fit to go on the offensive. After being embarrassed at the slaughterhouse and their own warehouse twice over, they organised a cyber task force to initiate an attack on CrimeNet's digital operations. The South African cybersecurity expert who led this task force went by the name of Locke. Vernon Locke was a man of abundant talent and very few scruples. His MI5 training and time working under the Murky Water banner had left him with quite a unique skill set. Hacking into CrimeNet was bold. What he did next was even more so. Instead of shutting down the network which facilitated and protected the Payday gang's activities, he approached Bane with an offer. As a Murky Water insider, he held an innate understanding of their internal operations and weaknesses. He was also fully aware of the extreme wealth the company had accrued over dozens of sordid mercenary campaigns. His offer was 2 lucrative jobs, targeting his current employers. Normally, Bane would jump at the chance to earn good money whilst placing a dent in the Murky's bottom line. But being coerced into a job was a new experience altogether, as refusing would result in the complete shutdown of CrimeNet. Begrudgingly, he decided to take Locke up on his offer. After all, as the organisation expanded, taking down CrimeNet had become the best way to halt operations, which Locke had refrained from doing. Even if the 4 heading out under Locke's command were walking into a trap, there were 8 talented heisters lying in wait to spring them out. Upon receiving details of Locke's planned hits, it became plain as day that additional athleticism had to be drafted to ensure their success. Apparently, Bonnie had little interest in skydiving. But there was another figure in the heisting world with whom Bane was acquainted, with a notably altruistic view on felony. This modern-day Robin Hood was also quite the athlete. Originally of Venezuelan descent, Bodhi was somewhat of a heisting legend, given his crew's propensity to take on heists that challenged the very elements themselves. As leader of the ex-president's gang, he'd become notorious for committing crime to show the fallibility of the justice system. In India, his crew released more than 100 million worth of stolen diamonds over the slums of Mumbai. At another site, a mining location in Austria, they'd orchestrated a C4 explosion to induce a landslide which left the gold ore transport vehicles ripe for the taking. An impressive CV. Bodhi's one desire in life was to complete the Osaki 8 death-defying ordeals that left him at the mercy of nature. As of when Bane contacted him to offer a place aboard the notorious Payday gang, he'd completed 6 of the trials and had lost most of his old gang members in the process. With only his final 2 tasks ahead, the Master of 6 Lives and the Act of Ultimate Trust, Bodhi was left with a decision to make. Return to his homeland of Venezuela to defy death again at Angel Falls, or to sow more discord within the fascist ranks he so detested alongside the Payday gang first. He found it hard to refuse. For now, Bane needed him to aid the Payday gang in repeating one of his previous feats, the birth of Sky. Garrett and the Payday task force caught wind of his entrance into the gang early, but crucially, he was still an unknown variable to Murky Water. Bodhi's arrival would take time, so a squad consisting of Wolf, Bonnie, Wick and Hoxton headed to Nevada to commence part 1 of Locke's plan. Beneath the mountain entailed hitting the compound he was stationed in at full force. This heist was a test of good faith, with Locke evidently exposing himself to danger to help earn the trust of Bane and his crew. Even so, Bane still had failsafes in place, with other members of the gang remaining on high alert nearby. Directed by Locke, the 4 blitzed the compound gates, finding planted breaching charges, blowtorches, and a keycard around the front entrance of what was essentially a military bunker. The facility was known as Blackridge, once a governmental military property before being purchased by Murky Water. As this base was one of Murky Water's primary command centers and storage facilities, Locke was familiar with the potential rewards of this heist. He was also creating the kind of disruption to Murky Water's ongoing investigation into the Payday gang that would divert any suspicion away from his department's failed cyber attack on CrimeNet. In any case, the breaching charges and blowtorch were Wolf's speciality, making entrance into even a militarized bunker a cinch. The keycard granted further access to the inner complex by way of a quick security hack into an airlock. This interior betrayed the concrete and military vehicles on the outside of the bunker, with its technologically advanced control center revealing the true nature of the Murky's well-financed operation. Using security cameras to inspect the separate vault contents, the team picked out the 4 which contained loot, ranging from priceless art to a master server storing government blackmail material. After emptying the vaults, the crew rode a zipline up a nearby elevator shaft to the rear entrance of the compound, coming face to face with Locke, applying the finishing touches of his betrayal to a trio of unfortunate Murky colleagues. If he was playing both sides, he was doing so convincingly. He'd paved a path for the gang's escape, intending to blend in with the waves of Murkies to enter a readied helicopter, whilst the crew used Stash C4 to destroy Murky Water's advanced radar systems and refuel the chopper for evac. Locke's plans were not short on spectacle, with the crew making their escape from the primary landing pad, which the Murkies used to move their spoils of war. Police reports in the aftermath of this job reached DC too late for any evidence to really be salvaged, but Garrett was sharp in his observation that the Murkies had a defecting insider on their hands. Sadly for them, they didn't catch on so quickly. What Locke had successfully deduced was that Murky Water was an organisation so large it had lost sight of the intricacies of its own operations, and his absence would not be noted in time if the gang moved quickly. So within the week, Dallas, Houston and Chains had met up with the new crewmate Bodhi to take on the birth of Sky. Locke used his clearance to gain access to the lower decks of a Murky-owned Z-170 Zeus cargo plane before takeoff from a nearby airfield. The cargo aircraft was designed to haul military equipment to their mercenary battlefields, but as the FBI files note, was more often used to transport their ill-gotten loot between their many storage facilities. As Locke had identified, this one would hold 3 pallets stocked with cash. as well as a regiment of murky operatives being moved following the previous assault on their Blackridge bunker. On his signal, the crew sprang an ambush on the unsuspecting PMCs. Bodie and Dallas ran a gauntlet through the hull, laying waste to the mercs whose numbers advantage did little to aid them in the cramped aircraft. The two reached the switch controlling the cargo bay doors, where Chains and Houston had moved the money-loaded pallets into position. Quickly, they don parachutes and follow the free-falling cash out of the back of the plane, skydiving into a retail part below. The arrival of cash by air had not gone unnoticed, and police were already cordoning off the landing zone by the time the heisters landed. They quickly ascertained the location of the pallets, reconstructing one which had shattered on impact, and lit flares to inform Locke of their precise location. They proceeded to fasten the money securely to Locke's helicopter before he airlifted the pallets out of range of a police pursuit. By this point, the sight of banknotes falling from the sky had drawn quite a police gathering, and the arrival of Garrett's armoured turret squad forced the crew underground for escape, using a contingency sewer plan and a pre-placed dinghy to move to the second LZ for pickup along the bank of the retail centre. Locke had succeeded spectacularly. Certain he would be doing business with the gang again, he bid farewell for the time being, offering to cover CrimeNet's digital fallibility to prevent any similar incidents in the future. Bain had to admit he'd been a passenger on this one, and Locke was a man with the sort of ambition to follow in his footsteps. But even he wouldn't have the stomach for Bain's true intentions. With that burden in mind, he moved yet again to begin recruiting for a plan that was years in the making. And very soon, an unstoppable chain of events would force the Payday gang down a one-way street. If you'd like to support what I'm doing and get exclusive rewards like early access to these videos, please consider donating to my Patreon. To go infamous and join the Discord, take a look in the description and be part of all future projects just like these guys.